Midnight. A cold, humming light. San Quentin's walls, thick with the weight of 1,000 regrets, held their breath. On January 29th, 2002, the world was about to lose a man who had taken so much from it. But this story is not about him. Not yet. It's about the silence that follows a scream. The echo of a life, snuffed out in the dark. The way a single act can ripple through families, through time, through the very soul of a city. Elizabeth Lyman, 81 years old, a retired piano teacher, her hands once gentle on the keys, her voice a comfort to children and neighbors. She lived alone in Bloomington, California, in a house filled with music and memory. She was the kind of neighbor who watered your plants when you were away, who remembered birthdays, who baked bread for the lonely. She was the kind of grandmother every child deserves. But on Memorial Day 1980, the world changed for Elizabeth, and for all of us. A door opens in the night. He was already a ghost by then, drifting from state to state, a man with no home but the road. Stephen Wayne Anderson, a name that would become a headline, a warning, a curse. He was born in Utah July 8, 1953. The firstborn son of a father who drank and raged, and a mother who turned cold to survive. By 14, Stephen and his brother were thrown out, left to wander, to sleep on couches, to learn that the world is not kind to the lost. He learned to steal before he learned to drive. He learned to fight before he learned to love. But that night, in 1980, he was just a shadow slipping through the dark. He cut the phone line. He removed a pane of glass from the French doors. He stepped inside, believing the house was empty. But Elizabeth Lyman was there. She woke, startled, and screamed. A single shot, a hollow point bullet, fired from a .45 at close range. Her life ended in an instant. He covered her with a blanket. He took the shell casing. He ransacked her house for money, less than $100. And then, in a moment that would haunt investigators and jurors for decades, he made himself a meal in her kitchen. Noodles, fried eggs. He sat at her table. The body was victim just a room away, and ate in silence. Outside, a neighbor watched, saw the light, the movement, the wrongness of it all, called the police. When deputies arrived, they found Anderson sitting in the living room, legs crossed, calm. He did not run. He did not fight. He did not speak. They found Elizabeth Lyman in her bed, a blanket pulled over her face, the music of her life silenced forever. Who was Elizabeth Lyman? She was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a teacher, a friend. She had taught generations of children to play, to listen, to feel. She had survived wars, loss, and the slow passing of time. She deserved to grow old in peace. Her murder was not just a crime. It was a wound that never healed. Her neighbors still remember the way her house smelled of bread and lilacs. Her students still remember the way her hands guided theirs on the keys. But what makes a man like Stephen Wayne Anderson? Is it fate? Is it choice? Is it the world's cruelty or his own? He was a child of violence. His father's fists, his mother's coldness. Thrown out at 14, he learned to survive by any means. By 18, he was breaking into schools, threatening police, earning his first prison sentence. Prison did not save him. It hardened him. He killed a fellow inmate in Utah. He assaulted guards, escaped, drifted into the underworld of contract killing. He confessed to at least 8 other murders, some for money, some for nothing at all. But in the end, it was the murder of Elizabeth Lyman that brought him to San Quentin. Anderson was not stupid. His IQ was measured at 136. He read voraciously. He wrote poetry, lines about loss, about regret, about the things he missed behind bars. He became known as the Bard of Death Row. His words published in journals. His letters read by strangers who saw a glimmer of humanity in the darkness. But was it real? Did he change? Did he regret? In court, he said, "She didn't deserve that. I was very wrong." He did not deny what he had done. He did not beg for mercy. But the system was unmoved. His lawyers argued that his childhood had shaped him, that his trial was flawed, that his defense was incompetent. Some members of Elizabeth Lyman's family even opposed the death penalty. But the state of California was resolute. The world did not stop for Elizabeth Lyman. The sun rose, the city stirred, and the news spread like a cold wind through Bloomington. A gentle woman, gone. A home, violated. A community, left to wonder, how could this happen here? Elizabeth's house stood silent, the piano keys untouched, the garden unwatered. Neighbors gathered in small, stunned circles, voices hushed. Children who once ran up her walkway now crossed the street, eyes averted from the yellow tape. Her students, grown now, scattered, heard the news and wept for the woman who had taught them to listen, not just to music, but to the world. Her niece, Ruth, remembered the way Elizabeth's laughter filled her room. She was the last of her line, Ruth whispered to a reporter. She had no children, but she had us. She had her students. She had her music. She deserved more time. Elizabeth Lyman's life was not just a headline. It was 1,000 small kindnesses, a legacy of patience and grace. Her murder was a theft, not just of money, but a memory of meaning. Meanwhile, Stephen Wayne Anderson sat in a cell, the world closing in. He was not the monster the papers made him out to be. At least, not always. He was a man who had learned to survive by becoming hard, by shutting out the world's pain before it could reach him. But in the long, slow hours of the night, the walls spoke. He wrote poems on scraps of paper, letters to strangers, confessions to the void. I miss leaves whispering, softly through the evening haze, little conversations upon the breeze, rustling giggles and hush, child, hush. He wrote about the things he missed, the things he never had. He wrote about regret, about the weight of his choices. He wrote about Elizabeth Lyman, though never by name. She didn't deserve that. I was very wrong. But the facts could not be erased. Anderson's life was a litany of violence, a trail of broken bodies and broken trust. Born July 8, 1953 in Utah, the eldest of two boys. Kicked out at 14, left adrift from couch to couch, city to city. First arrested at 18 for burglary in Farmington, New Mexico. Threatened police officers. Sentenced to 1 to 5 years. Paroled but never free. More burglaries, more time, 10 to 50 years for aggravated burglary. In Utah State Prison, he killed a fellow inmate Blundell on August 24, 1977. Assaulted another inmate. Assaulted a correctional officer. Escaped from prison on November 24, 1979. Vanished into the mountains. Worked for narcotics traffickers. Implicated in at least one more murder. Confessed to 6 contract killings in Las Vegas, though not all were confirmed. May 26, 1980. Broke into Elizabeth Lyman's home. Murdered her. Arrested at the scene. Before we continue, hit the like button, subscribe button, and the bell for notification anytime we share a story like this. He was a man who seemed to bring violence with him wherever he went. A man who, by his own admission, was born and trained to take lives. The trial was swift, but not simple. Prosecutors painted Anderson as a sociopath, a man beyond redemption. They listed his crimes, his confessions, his lack of remorse. But the defense tried to tell another story. They spoke of his childhood, the beatings, the abandonment. They argued that prison had not reformed him, but had made him worse. They pointed to his intelligence, an IQ of 136, and his writing, his attempts at self-reflection. But the jury saw the facts. An elderly woman murdered in her bed. A man who sat in her kitchen, eating her food, waiting for police. On July 24, 1981, Stephen Wayne Anderson was sentenced to death. San Quentin became his world. He spent 20 years on death row, watching the seasons change through a narrow window. He wrote, he read, he fought. Sometimes with words, sometimes with fists. He became known as a bard of death row. His poems published in literary journals. His letters read by activists and strangers. Some saw a man transformed, a soul redeemed by art. Others saw only a performance, a mask worn by a killer. He earned awards for his writing. He learned Latin. He wrote a play, started a novel, sent poems to PN America. But the violence did not end. He assaulted another inmate in 1987, used force and violence in 1984 and 1985. The darkness was never far away. As his execution date approached, A coalition of writers, activists, and even some of Elizabeth Lyman's family pleaded for mercy. They argued that Anderson had changed, that his trial had been flawed, that his lawyer had been incompetent. The late S. Donald Ames, Anderson's court-appointed attorney, had a record of failed defenses. 2 other clients had their death sentences overturned because of his incompetence. Anderson's defenders argued that he, too, had been failed by the system. Even some of Elizabeth Lyman's relatives opposed the execution. They said justice had been served by his decades behind bars. They said another death would not bring Elizabeth back. But the state of California was unmoved. Governor Gray Davis, known for his tough stance on crime, denied clemency. He called Anderson's intelligence all the more reprehensible, a sign that he knew exactly what he was doing. January 28, 2002, the air outside San Quentin was near freezing. Nearly 200 people gathered, holding candles, praying, protesting. Some for justice, some for mercy. Inside, Anderson sat on his cot, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. He ate his last meal, grilled cheese sandwiches, peach pie, chocolate chip ice cream. Simple food, a memory of childhood, or what childhood should have been. He spoke little. He prayed, quietly, under his breath. He did not resist when the guards came for him. At 12:18 a.m., the execution began. He turned to his attorney, Margot Rocconi, who mouthed, "I love you." He mouthed back, "Thank you." He had no last words. At 12:30 a.m., he was pronounced dead. But the story does not end there. Not for Elizabeth Lyman's family, who still set a place for her at the table. Not for the neighbors, who still cross the street when they pass her house. Not for the activists, who still argue about justice and mercy, about the meaning of redemption. And not for the city, which still remembers the night the world changed. What did Anderson think in those final moments? Did he see Elizabeth's face? Did he remember the sound of her scream, the weight of the gun in his hand? Did he regret truly, or was it just another mask? In his last letter, he wrote, "It's too bad I'm only learning the meaning of life just as I'm about to lose it." Was that enough? Can a lifetime of violence be redeemed by a few lines of poetry, a handful of regrets? Outside San Quentin, the crowd began to disperse. Some wept, some cheered, some stood in silence, unsure what to feel. A priest, Lyle Grosjean, who had walked 25 miles to protest the execution, said, "We're unequivocally opposed to the death penalty in all cases, guilty or innocent. Punishment isn't the answer. Compassion is." But for others, there was only relief. A killer was gone. A debt paid. But the story is not over. There are still secrets buried in the files. Still voices unheard. Still questions that haunt the night. What really happened in the years Anderson spent on the run? Who were the other victims? The ones whose names never made the headlines? And what does justice look like when the lines between guilt and redemption blur? The world keeps its secrets. Some are buried in shallow graves, others in the silence between heartbeats. But the truth, like the dawn, always finds a way through the cracks. Elizabeth Lyman's name is the one we remember, but she was not the only one. Stephen Wayne Anderson's trail was long, winding to the deserts of Nevada, the mountains of Utah, the lonely highways of California. He confessed to at least 8 other murders, some for money, some for nothing at all. There was Blundell, the fellow inmate in Utah State Prison, stabbed in the dark during a movie. There were the nameless men in Las Vegas, contract killings for traffickers and criminals, their stories lost in the shadows. There was a man in the mountains of Salt Lake County, killed while Anderson was on a run, his name a whisper in police files. Each victim had a life, a family, a story. Each one left a hole in the world, a wound that never healed. In a small house in Utah, a mother still sets a place at the table for her son. She remembers the last time she saw him, the way he laughed, the way he promised to come home soon. She never knew what happened, only that he vanished, that the police came with questions, that the world grew colder. She keeps his photograph on the mantle, dusted every morning, a silent prayer for justice, for peace, for the families of the victims. There is no closure. There is only the slow, grinding ache of absence. Birthdays come and go. Anniversaries pass in silence. The world moves on, but the pain remains. Some find solace in faith, some in anger, some in the hope that somewhere justice was done. But justice is a slippery thing. It does not bring back the dead. It does not heal the wounds. Anderson's transformation on death row was real, but incomplete. He wrote poems that won awards, letters that moved strangers to tears. He learned Latin, read philosophy, debated the meaning of life with anyone who would listen. He wrote, "I miss the sensation of all things purified, of life free of all its burdens. And I miss just living for sunsets and the moon. And those things lost, hush, child, hush." He became a symbol, a monster to some, a cautionary tale to others, a tragic figure to a few. But even as he wrote about regret, about the meaning of life, the violence did not end. He fought with other inmates. He assaulted guards. The darkness was never far away. Anderson's case became a battleground for larger questions. Was he a product of his environment or the architect of his own destruction? Did the system fail him, or did he fail the system? His defenders argued that his childhood, marked by violence, neglect, and abandonment, set him on a path he could not escape. They pointed to the incompetence of his trial lawyer, the procedural errors, the lack of intervention when he was young. His prosecutors argued that he was beyond redemption, that his intelligence made his crimes all the more chilling. The courts were divided. Some judges dissented, arguing that Anderson's death sentence was as much a failure of the system as it was a punishment for his crimes. But in the end, the sentence stood. The night of his execution, Anderson walked the last 30 feet of his life in silence. No family came to witness. No friends from his past. Only his attorney, Margot Rocconi, stood behind the glass, mouthing words of comfort. He lay on the gurney, eyes fixed on the ceiling, breathing slow and steady. When asked for last words, he shook his head. The chemicals flowed. His body tensed, then stilled. 13 minutes later, he was gone. Outside San Quentin, the crowd held candles against the cold. Some prayed for Anderson's soul. Some prayed for Elizabeth Lyman. Some prayed for an end to the cycle of violence. A priest spoke. "We are here because we believe in mercy. We are here because we believe that every life has value, even the lives of those who have done terrible things." But not everyone agreed. Some saw only justice, long delayed. Elizabeth Lyman's legacy lives on in the memories of those who knew her. Her students still play the pieces she taught them, their fingers guided by her gentle touch. Her neighbors still remember the smell of her bread, the sound of her laughter. She was more than a victim. She was a teacher, a friend, a light in the darkness. Her death was a tragedy, but her life was a gift. But the story does not end with Anderson's death. There are still questions that haunt the night. What happened to the other victims? Who mourns for the nameless, the forgotten, the lost? What could have been done to save Anderson from himself, to save his victims from him? And what does justice look like when the lines between guilt and redemption blur? In Bloomington, the house where Elizabeth Lyman lived still stands. The piano is silent, the garden overgrown, but her memory lingers, a reminder of what was lost. In Utah and Nevada, in California, families still wait for answers, for closure, for peace. Stephen Wayne Anderson's story is not just about crime and punishment. It is about the choices we make, the systems we build, the lives we touch. It is about the way violence ripples through generations, leaving scars that never heal. It is about the possibility of change and the limits of redemption. So I ask you, what would you have done if it were your son, your neighbor, your city? Would you have shown mercy or demanded justice? Would you have seen the man or only the monster? Would you have fought for his life or for his death? If this story shook something in you, share it. Stories like this need light. We must remember the victims, not just as names in a headline, but as lives lived, as people loved. We must remember the failures of the system, the cracks through which so many fall. And we must ask ourselves every day, what kind of world do we want to build? One of vengeance or one of mercy? One of silence or one of truth? The story of Stephen Wayne Anderson is over, but the story of justice, of redemption of memory. That story is still being written. If this story shook something in you, share it. Stories like this need light.